The city lights of Manhattan flickered against the night sky like distant stars scattered across a dark ocean. For most, the evening was just another Friday. The hurried footsteps of businessmen, the rhythmic hum of taxis, the occasional laughter spilling from a rooftop bar. But for Ethan Carter, tonight held a fragile, priceless promise. His daughter Ava's 10th birthday. In his mind, he had rehearsed every detail. The soft clink of cutlery, the subtle glow of candlelight, the gentle curve of her smile when she tasted something exquisite for the first time. Ethan's hands, rough from oil and sweat, gripped the leather strap of his worn bag as he held Ava close. She was practically bouncing with excitement, her small hand tucked into his. "I can't believe we're really here," she whispered, eyes wide as she took in the opulent interior of Le Marceau, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Crystal chandeliers refracted golden light across marble floors, and waiters in crisp uniforms glided silently between tables, balancing trays of delicacies like skilled performers in an intricate ballet. For Ethan, the world felt surreal. He was a man more accustomed to engine grease than champagne flutes, to grease-stained overalls rather than tailored suits and polished shoes. Yet, as he guided Ava to their reserved table, a warm pride swelled inside him. This was her night, a memory he wanted etched into her mind forever. He smiled at her, a quiet, unassuming smile, and it seemed to settle the fluttering excitement in her chest. Across the room, Harper Monroe observed without drawing attention. The billionaire CEO rarely ventured into places without purpose, and tonight's visit was more a routine inspection of the city's culinary elite than anything else. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, caught sight of Ethan immediately, not because he stood out, but because he didn't. Here, amidst the sparkling wealth and curated perfection, he was ordinary. A man who carried love in the simplest gestures, brushing Ava's hair behind her ear, sharing a quiet joke that made her laugh softly, the tenderness in his gaze that belonged only to her. There was something magnetic about his calm presence, something that, in Harper's world, was both rare and dangerous in its authenticity. Ethan pulled out Ava's chair and helped her settle, smoothing her dress, checking that she was comfortable. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to forget everything else, the loneliness of his apartment, the absence of his wife, the endless work that barely covered the bills. Tonight was theirs. A private bubble of light in a city that often felt cold and indifferent. Then, without warning, the air shifted. The soft murmur of conversation and the clatter of silverware were pierced by the sharp metallic click of guns being cocked. 3 masked men appeared at the entrance, their movements deliberate and threatening. Shouts erupted instantly, screams bouncing off the high ceilings, forks and glasses clattering to the floor. Patrons froze, wide-eyed, some diving for cover, others too stunned to move. Harper's heart raced. Money, influence, security personnel. None of it mattered now. She realized with a cold clarity that here, in this gilded room, they were all vulnerable, but not Ethan. He instinctively pressed Ava under the table, his strong arms shielding her tiny frame. The first robber barked orders, waving a pistol, demanding wallets and valuables. Ethan's eyes scanned the room, noting every detail. The positions of the attackers, the nearest exits, the gaps between tables. Years of experience in high-stress situations, ones he rarely spoke of, flared to life. There was no hesitation, no panic, just focus. Ethan whispered reassurances to Ava, his voice low but steady. "Stay down. Breathe slowly. I've got you." The words were simple, but they carried an unshakable certainty. He shifted slightly, angling his body to shield her from line of sight while keeping an eye on the nearest robber. In a flash of movement, honed by necessity and instinct, he disarmed one of the men, a swift, precise maneuver that left the attacker stumbling backward, dazed but unharmed. Around him, chaos surged. A chandelier swayed dangerously above, silverware skittered across the marble, and a server froze mid-step, tray in hand, terror etched into his features. Yet Ethan moved with deliberate calm, creating a path for patrons to escape. His presence was both a shield and a guide, invisible to the robbers who underestimated him because of his unassuming appearance. Harper's gaze lingered. She saw not just bravery, but a depth of humanity she rarely encountered. And though Ethan didn't look her way, didn't seek acknowledgement, she couldn't shake the questions forming in her mind. Who was this man? What had life carved into him to make him this way? And what could someone like her possibly learn from him? The room settled into uneasy silence, punctuated only by the distant wail of sirens. But in Harper's heart, the echoes of that calm, fearless man would not fade. The flashing lights of police cars cast jagged shadows across the elegant walls of Le Marceau, illuminating the aftermath of chaos. Patrons whispered in small nervous clusters, some still shaking, others clutching their belongings as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. The robbers, now restrained and handcuffed, stared in disbelief at the man who had turned their aggression into failure. Ethan Carter sat at the edge of a table, cradling Ava, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. She had quieted, lulled by his calm presence, but her wide eyes still flicked nervously toward the exits, as if expecting danger to return. Harper Monroe remained a step behind the crowd, her heart pounding and mind racing. She had seen many things in her life: power struggles, hostile takeovers, financial collapses, but courage like Ethan's was rare and magnetic. He had protected not just his daughter, but the strangers around him, turning fear into action without hesitation. His eyes, steady and clear despite the chaos, held a quiet intensity that made her realize he carried a world of experiences she could not even imagine. Ethan's hands were steady as he brushed a strand of hair from Ava's forehead, murmuring gentle reassurances. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. We're okay." His voice was soft, measured, yet carried a weight that anchored her to reality, allowing her to exhale in a trembling, relieved sigh. For a moment, the luxury of the restaurant, the glimmering chandeliers, and the sparkling wine glasses all faded into irrelevance. All that mattered was this: Ava, alive and in his arms. Paramedics and officers began moving through the room, checking patrons, recording statements, and offering support. Ethan, however, remained calm, standing only when necessary to answer questions briefly and direct attention to Ava. He declined interviews, brushing away any suggestion of heroism with a quiet, "We're fine." It wasn't humility in the shallow sense. It was a priority. Life mattered more than recognition, more than headlines or accolades. He had given everything that night to ensure safety, and that was enough. Harper approached cautiously, drawn by the energy of someone who seemed larger than the fear that surrounded them. She waited until Ethan's focus was fully on Ava before speaking, her voice low but firm. "Are you hurt?" she asked, concern threading every word. Her tone carried both authority and curiosity, a mixture that Ethan could sense immediately. He glanced up briefly, sizing her presence. Tall, poised, undeniably powerful, yet clearly rattled by what she had witnessed. "I'm fine," he replied simply, keeping his focus on Ava. His answer was measured, almost automatic, but Harper sensed there was more beneath the surface. Not pride, not bravado, but experience. Hard-earned, silent, and real. Ava tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Daddy, can we eat the cake now?" Her voice was tentative, wary of the chaos still surrounding them, but innocent, insistent, and full of hope. Ethan's heart warmed despite the adrenaline still thrumming through his veins. He smiled at her, the kind of smile that carried both exhaustion and triumph, the kind only a parent could give. "Yes, we can," he said, settling her back into her seat, guiding the small, trembling hands to the birthday dessert that had survived the commotion. Harper watched silently as the father and daughter shared that quiet, precious moment. For Ethan, this was not a public victory. It was a private one, measured in the safety of a child and the fleeting serenity of a birthday celebration restored. She felt an unexpected pang in her chest, a mixture of admiration and something more intangible. Who was this man, whose life had been shaped by loss and resilience, whose love was both armor and sanctuary? The cameras outside captured every angle of the scene: the subdued robbers, the relieved patrons, and the one figure who stood quietly apart from the frenzy. Ethan did not seek them out, did not wave, did not offer a story. He only held Ava close, whispering words meant for her ears alone, ensuring that she knew her father's presence was constant, unshakable. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Harper lingered, studying him from across the room. She wanted to approach again, to speak, to understand, but something stopped her. Not fear, not hesitation, but respect. He was a man whose life had been forged in trials she could not see, whose calm in the face of danger was not performative but innate. And yet, the curiosity burned stronger with every heartbeat. The quiet hero who chose ordinary life over fame. How had he become so unyielding, so precise, so human? Outside, the city continued its rhythm, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded within those walls. But for Ethan and Ava, every step back toward their small apartment carried a renewed appreciation for life, for safety, for each other. The city may not have noticed, the world may not have celebrated, but the night had etched a permanent memory into their hearts: courage, love, and unwavering protection in the face of fear. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, Harper finally made her move. She approached, her presence deliberate but measured. "Ethan Carter," she said, her voice steady. "I need to know, how did you stay so calm?" Her question was more than curiosity. It was the beginning of a story neither of them knew was about to unfold. Ethan Carter's footsteps echoed softly against the worn wooden floors of his small apartment, a familiar rhythm that felt both grounding and painfully ordinary after the night's chaos. Ava skipped ahead, her laughter light but tentative, the echoes of the robbery still flickering in her wide, expressive eyes. The city beyond the window hummed with life, sirens, horns, distant chatter, but inside the world was quiet, intimate, and entirely theirs. Sitting at the kitchen table, Ethan watched Ava carefully unwrap the final remnants of her birthday gifts. Her eyes sparkled with delight at each surprise, unaware of the shadows that lingered just beyond the edge of his mind. He wanted to be fully present, to bask in this moment of triumph and tenderness, but fragments of the night's adrenaline refused to let him rest. The precision with which he had moved, the rapid assessment of threats, the calm yet commanding control, these were not innate talents, and they were not taught in classrooms. They came from a past he rarely shared, one filled with lessons hard-earned and often painful. Harper Monroe, meanwhile, could not stop thinking about him. The memory of his quiet courage clung stubbornly to her consciousness. She had returned to her towering office in the financial district, yet the world of wealth, meetings, and meticulously curated power felt hollow compared to the raw humanity she had witnessed. Ethan had faced danger and fear with a composure she had never seen before, not the kind purchased with money, but the kind forged in life's relentless crucible. She found herself compelled to understand him, not as a hero for headlines, but as a man who seemed to embody something she had long forgotten: real strength tempered by love. For Ethan, the morning after the robbery was a slow unraveling of emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. He replayed the scene in his mind: the glint of metal under chandeliers, the abrupt shouts, the way Ava had clung to him without fear because she trusted him completely. He had protected her with instinct and skill, but beneath the calm, there was a persistent hum of tension. Memories he had long buried, the kind that taught him vigilance, patience, and strategy, rose to the surface. In his youth, survival had not been a choice but a necessity. Every instinct, every precise movement had been honed in moments that were far darker and far less forgiving than a restaurant robbery. He had learned to measure danger, to act decisively, and to shield those he loved no matter the cost. Ava's voice pulled him back. "Daddy, can we have pancakes?" she asked, her small hands folded on the table, eyes shining with hope. The simplicity of her request was a balm to his frayed nerves. He nodded, forcing a smile that masked the weight of his thoughts. In her world, life was measured in syrup and laughter, not in chaos and fear. And so, he poured, stirred, and served, creating a sense of normalcy that grounded them both. But normalcy was fragile. Harper's presence lingered in his mind, an unexpected echo that he could neither fully dismiss nor fully understand. She had watched him without judgment, without intrusion, yet her gaze carried a question he could sense even now. What shaped a man who could face danger with such unwavering calm? Ethan had no intention of answering. His life was private, his past a story he told only to himself. And yet, somewhere in the quiet, he wondered if the world, people like Harper, might need to understand that bravery was not always loud, and heroism was not always celebrated. Later that day, Harper returned. She had tracked him, not through the intrusion of power or fame, but through quiet observation and careful inquiry. When she knocked on the door, Ethan's first instinct was caution. He studied her from the threshold, noting the poise, the measured confidence, and the subtle warmth in her eyes that suggested curiosity rather than entitlement. "I wanted to thank you," she began, her voice steady, yet tinged with vulnerability. "Not for the headlines, but for what you did, for how you kept everyone safe." Her gaze lingered on Ava, who peeked from behind her father, a quiet smile brushing her lips. "You didn't have to be a hero, and yet—" Her words trailed, unfinished, but the meaning was clear. She wanted to know him, understand him, perhaps even learn from him. Ethan studied her silently for a moment, the weight of his decision pressing down. Hospitality and caution warred in his mind. Inviting her in could lead to questions he wasn't ready to answer, questions about his past, his fears, and the pain that shaped him. And yet, something about Harper's presence, her sincere respect, made him hesitate. He nodded slowly. "Come in," he said, the single phrase heavy with unspoken trust. Inside, the apartment was modest but warm. Personal touches hinted at love and loss. Framed photos of Ava smiling, a worn workbench in the corner, and the faint aroma of home-cooked meals. Harper took it in silently, aware that every detail was a reflection of a life built not on wealth, but on devotion and resilience. As they spoke, Ethan's story began to emerge. Not in grand confessions, but in careful observations of his life, the quiet lessons he passed to Ava, and the way he measured courage by action rather than words. Harper listened, captivated not only by the events of the night before, but by the depth of character she sensed beneath the surface. By the time she left, the air between them had shifted. There was no rush, no sudden declarations, only a tentative understanding, a recognition that lives so different in appearance could share a profound connection through values, bravery, and love. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent energy, but inside, two worlds had brushed against each other, leaving traces that neither would forget. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of Ethan Carter's apartment, casting soft lines of gold across the kitchen floor. Ava's laughter echoed through the small space as she twirled in a makeshift dance, still clutching the remnants of her birthday gifts. Ethan watched, a quiet smile tugging at his lips, feeling a warmth that only her presence could bring. Yet beneath that calm exterior, a storm of thoughts churned. Last night's events were over, yet the memories of danger and precision refused to fade. Each movement, each decision was etched into his mind, reminding him that the past was never truly behind him. Ethan had long lived in the tension between ordinary life and the skills he had acquired long ago. As a young man, he had learned to navigate danger with acute awareness and quick reflexes, not for glory, but survival. Every instinct had been honed in shadows he never spoke of, in moments that demanded courage even when fear threatened to paralyze him. Those lessons had become second nature, and yet, in the quiet moments, they whispered reminders of loss and sacrifice, shaping not only the man he was, but the father he strived to be. Later that day, Harper Monroe returned. This time, there was no knock, no cautious approach. She had waited until Ethan had settled Ava into a safe space with a simple task, drawing, coloring, or reading, before entering. Her eyes scanned the apartment, not to judge, but to understand. She observed the modest furnishings, the small imperfections that spoke of life lived with effort and care rather than indulgence, and she felt an unexpected respect bloom within her. "I wanted to see how she's doing," Harper said softly, gesturing toward Ava. The girl looked up, shy but curious, then returned to her coloring, trusting Ethan's judgment about visitors. Harper's attention turned to Ethan, who leaned against the counter, hands folded. There was a pause, a moment pregnant with unspoken thoughts, as both seemed to measure the space between curiosity and caution. Ethan's voice was measured, calm, yet carried an underlying edge, honed over years of experience. "She's fine. You don't need to worry about her." It was more than reassurance. It was a shield, a boundary drawn carefully to protect the fragile balance of their ordinary life from intrusion. Harper nodded, understanding that this was not dismissiveness, but vigilance. She had encountered power, influence, and ambition in abundance, but restraint grounded in love, selfless and unwavering, was rarer than she had imagined. She lingered, drawn by the question she could not yet articulate. "Ethan," she said, "last night, what you did, it wasn't just instinct, was it? There's a past there, isn't there?" The words were tentative, probing, yet carried a sincere desire to understand rather than interrogate. Ethan's eyes darkened slightly, a shadow passing over the clarity that defined his calm demeanor. Memories of days filled with hardship, moments of loss, and the relentless training that had shaped him flickered through his mind. He had learned, often painfully, that protection was not an option. It was a responsibility that demanded sacrifice, vigilance, and relentless courage. Yet he rarely shared this with anyone, because sharing would mean peeling back layers of vulnerability he had long vowed to keep private. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, the apartment filled only with the quiet rustle of a page turning and the distant hum of the city. Then, finally, Ethan spoke. His voice was steady, revealing fragments without surrendering all. He spoke of lessons learned from mistakes, of loss that had hardened him yet tempered his heart, and of the singular guiding principle that governed his life: protecting Ava at all costs. There were no dramatics, no exaggeration, just the raw, unvarnished truth of a man shaped by experience. Harper listened, captivated. Every word, every subtle inflection, painted a portrait of strength tempered by love, of courage born not from ego but necessity. She realized that Ethan's heroism the night before was not a one-time act of bravery. It was the culmination of years of living with purpose, of understanding fear, and of choosing action over hesitation. The realization unsettled her in ways she could not immediately define. This was a man whose life was entirely his own, yet entirely devoted to another, a combination she had seldom witnessed. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the quiet revelations unfolding within the apartment. But inside, a fragile trust was forming. Fragile, yet profound. Harper's presence no longer felt intrusive. Ethan's willingness to share fragments of his past signaled the opening of a door he rarely allowed anyone to approach. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Ava bounded into the room, her small face lit with a combination of excitement and curiosity. "Daddy, can we make dinner together?" she asked, her voice, playful and innocent, was a reminder of what truly mattered. Ethan's smile softened, the shadows of the past receding momentarily in the warmth of family. Harper observed, sensing the quiet heroism not in grand gestures, but in the day-to-day acts of love, patience, and care. The room settled into a gentle rhythm, Ethan guiding Ava through chopping vegetables, Harper quietly assisting when asked, laughter mingling with the simmer of sauce. In that simple domesticity, the layers of courage, resilience, and humanity were on full display, far more compelling than any headline or public acclaim. The evening settled over Manhattan like a velvet curtain, and Ethan Carter found himself on the balcony of his modest apartment, the cool air brushing against his skin as he watched Ava play quietly with the last of her birthday balloons. The city pulsed beneath him, unaware of the fragile victories and hidden scars that defined the lives within its towering skyline. Last night's chaos had passed, yet its echoes lingered, not as fear, but as a quiet reminder of the balance between ordinary life and the extraordinary circumstances he sometimes faced. Harper Monroe's presence had become more than curiosity. It was now a thread pulling at the fabric of his daily routine. She had returned earlier that day, not with questions, but with a quiet willingness to simply observe, to understand. Her eyes, which often carried a cool, calculating edge in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations, softened in the warmth of Ethan's apartment. She had begun to see that bravery was not measured in press conferences or public accolades. It was measured in devotion, in the subtle acts of courage that shaped lives in silence. Ethan kept an eye on Ava as she danced around the kitchen, stirring imaginary sauces and tasting bits of raw vegetables with exaggerated enthusiasm. He smiled, a rare lightness breaking through the weight of past memories. Yet, beneath that calm, attention persisted. Harper's lingering presence forced him to confront questions he had long avoided. How much of himself should he reveal? And how could he reconcile a past built on survival with a present defined by care and protection? The knock on the door was soft, deliberate, and familiar. Harper stepped inside, this time without hesitation, her expression both confident and tentative. "I wanted to bring something," she said, holding a small box of pastries from a boutique bakery she knew he'd never indulge in for himself. She extended it toward him with a smile that carried no pretense, only sincerity. Ethan accepted it quietly, nodding in acknowledgement, sensing in her gesture a rare understanding of the subtle pressures he carried. They settled into the small living room, Ava eventually curling up on the couch with a coloring book while Ethan and Harper shared a silence that was comfortable rather than forced. She studied him, noticing the quiet discipline in his movements, the way he carried responsibility as effortlessly as he carried his daughter's safety. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if things had been different?" Harper asked softly. Her question was layered, not about the robbery, but about the life that had shaped him, about the moments and losses that forged the man who could remain calm when others panicked. Ethan's gaze drifted to the window, watching the city lights blur in the distance. "Sometimes," he admitted, voice low and thoughtful. "But I can't dwell on it. Life moves forward whether you're ready or not." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience, of decisions made under pressure and of sacrifices that had carved quiet channels of strength through his heart. Harper nodded, sensing the depth behind his brevity, recognizing that every word, every silence was a window into resilience honed over years. Ava's sudden laughter interrupted the quiet, and for a brief moment, all tension lifted. She had created a small fort with pillows and blankets, imagining herself as the captain of a grand ship navigating an ocean of imagination. Ethan's smile softened further, his heart swelling at the sight of her joy. Harper watched, realizing that heroism did not always manifest in dramatic rescues. Sometimes it was in the ordinary, patient acts of love that shaped a child's world. The night deepened, and Harper lingered longer than she might have in another circumstance, drawn by the authenticity of their lives. She began to understand that the man who had saved lives in a restaurant was the same man who built a fortress of love in his home, and that the quiet consistency of that care required more courage than any public act of heroism. Finally, as the hour grew late, Harper stood. "I should go," she said, though her hesitation betrayed the fact that she did not want to leave. Ethan nodded, a subtle understanding passing between them, a recognition that something had shifted, though the exact nature of it remained unspoken. "Thank you for coming," he said simply, his voice carrying a quiet weight. "And for understanding." Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm, but inside the apartment, a bond had begun to form, delicate, tentative, yet undeniable. It was a connection born not from circumstance, but from witnessing courage, devotion, and humanity in its purest forms. Both of them knew that the night of chaos had been a catalyst, but what followed, the slow, careful intertwining of trust, respect, and quiet admiration, was entirely their choice. As Harper walked away, she glanced back at the apartment one last time, seeing Ethan silhouetted against the warm glow of the kitchen light, Ava asleep on the couch. A thought lingered in her mind, insistent and unrelenting. Some people could not be understood by power, influence, or money. They could only be understood by patience, attention, and the courage to see beyond the obvious. End of Part 5. Suspense Beat. The bond between Ethan and Harper deepens, shifting from curiosity to mutual understanding. The audience is left wondering how their connection will evolve and what challenges or revelations might test the trust and admiration forming between them. The first light of dawn spilled into Ethan Carter's apartment, soft and golden, painting the walls with warmth that contrasted the tension of the past 24 hours. Ava stirred, yawning and stretching, her small face illuminated with the effortless joy of childhood that made every sacrifice Ethan had ever endured worthwhile. He watched her for a moment, marveling at how life could be both fragile and resilient, tender and unyielding. Last night, the memory of fear still lingered, but today was a new canvas, a space to rebuild, to celebrate the quiet victories that often went unnoticed. Harper Monroe's presence had become less of an intrusion and more of a rhythm in Ethan's life. She had returned again, not as an observer, but as a participant in the small, deliberate joys of family life. She helped Ava fold laundry, offered quiet advice as Ethan prepared breakfast, and, most importantly, she listened, not for control, but to understand. For Harper, the walls built by wealth and influence were familiar territory, yet Ethan's world was different. His courage was private, his victories personal, and his love unwavering. Watching him, she realized that true strength wasn't displayed on grand stages. It was measured in sacrifice, patience, and devotion that left no room for ego. As breakfast ended, Ethan and Harper shared a rare moment of quiet together. The clatter of plates faded, replaced by the hum of the city outside and the gentle breathing of a sleeping Ava. "You've changed my perspective," Harper said softly, her gaze steady. "I've always thought power could solve everything, but what I saw last night, that wasn't power. That was humanity." Ethan studied her quietly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never needed recognition. Yet here was someone who saw the essence of his life without needing to own it or reshape it. A knock at the door drew their attention. Outside stood two police officers, their expressions respectful but formal. "Mr. Carter," one began, "there's been a follow-up request. The media, they—" Ethan raised a hand, shaking his head gently. "No interviews," he said simply. His voice carried calm authority. "We're fine. That's all that matters." The officers nodded, recognizing the quiet command in his tone, and left without further insistence. Once the door closed, Harper lingered. She studied Ethan, sensing the quiet storm beneath his calm exterior. The history, the responsibility, the sacrifices, and the depth of love that drove every decision he made. And for the first time, she allowed herself to see beyond the role of the observer. She realized that her fascination was no longer just curiosity. It was respect, admiration, and perhaps the subtle beginnings of something she had not expected. Connection. Ethan walked to Ava's room, gently lifting her into his arms. Her head rested against his shoulder, eyes half closed in lingering sleepiness. He carried her to the small balcony, watching the sun fully rise, painting the city in hues of gold and rose. "We're okay," he whispered, a mantra he repeated not just for her, but for himself. "We're safe, and we're together." Harper joined them silently, standing a respectful distance away. She did not need words. The scene spoke volumes. A father's courage, a daughter's trust, and the quiet resilience of life after chaos. Ethan had shown that true strength was not in the headlines, nor in the fleeting recognition of strangers, but in the ability to protect, to nurture, and to give love without expectation. Minutes stretched into a peaceful silence, and Harper finally spoke, her voice steady yet soft. "I don't think I've ever met someone like you," she admitted. "Someone who measures strength by what they protect, rather than what they control." Ethan met her gaze, acknowledging the weight of her words without arrogance or pride. For once, he allowed the acknowledgement of another's admiration without deflection. Ava stirred once more, rubbing her eyes, and smiled at the two adults standing close together. "Can we have pancakes again?" she asked. Ethan chuckled softly, holding her closer, and Harper smiled, recognizing the small, profound joys that defined the Carter household. Life, fragile and unpredictable, continued. But within the walls of their modest apartment, love, courage, and trust had taken root, resilient and enduring. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent energy, but within, a story had unfolded that no headline could capture. A story of quiet heroism, of healing after grief, of humility, and of the human heart's capacity to endure and give. For Ethan, the past was present in every careful decision. For Harper, the lessons were as clear as the morning light. Power was fleeting, but courage and love were eternal. As the sun rose fully, bathing the city in brilliance, Ethan, Ava, and Harper stood together on the balcony, a small, ordinary family shaped by extraordinary circumstances. And in that moment, the world, with all its chaos and unpredictability, felt balanced, steady, and profoundly hopeful.